if you don't want to glow like that or have someone just spying you all the time and you can just spot them glowing just bright green in front of you, and if that's something you don't actually want, the actual antivenom to this is free software. Now, Linux from scratch is a guide to install a fully functioning operating system with the Linux kernel and the GNU tools and utilities, compilers, and all of this shit. Now, this is the books and chapters for installing Linux from scratch. Now, what you need to do is that it is not the simplest task ever. It is one of the hardest fates, just not because it's very technical, just because you can mess up a lot of things, and there are a huge set of packages and tool chains. If you compile them in a different configuration, for example, a little flag that just seems insignificant enough, and you just change that to something that doesn't support along with other dependencies, then you are absolutely fucked. And this is the problem of Linux from scratch. It takes a lot of time depending on your hardware to compile and run up these things and create the file structures and all of those things. Now, so before we go into the actual pragmatic implications of Linux from scratch, what is Linux from scratch actually? So some people think that Linux from scratch is a distribution of Linux, like Arch or Gentoo, because it has a logo, and it is something that's viewed as the hardest fate of a Linux user. Every Linux user is fated to install Linux from scratch, or either they're gonna die from installing Linux from scratch, or they're gonna live and become the truest Giga Chad ever. Now, there's the catch here. What if I told you that... Oh, I hate this thing. My mic is absolutely terrible position. Get out of here. Now, here's an analogy. Very formal analogy here. Now, if this guy tells you that there is the world beyond what you have been jailed in, you can get free, but you have to work a lot. You have to work your ass off to actually utilize the red pill is gonna about to give you. Now, there is a warning sign, because Linux from scratch is not for the faint of heart. If you try to install Linux from scratch, you have to you have to write a goodbye letter in advance, just in case you die from installing Linux from scratch. So these are the typical stereotypes of the Linux from scratch guide. So what is Linux from scratch? So let's explore in a very traditional, very very simplistic way. Linux from scratch is actually very simple. It is just there are tools available on the internet for you to download and compile and set up on your computer, depending on your hardware architecture. Now, if you see that we're gonna ignore the LFS variables and all of those things, so we're gonna focus on the core principle. So the biggest confusing thing, everyone thinks that you have to have a host system to install Linux from scratch, because it doesn't come with a live CD. Of course it doesn't, because you have to build the live CD yourself. You have to build a temporary system yourself. Now, first of all, we need the binutils, which are the linker and assembler by GNU, by Richard Stallman, the father. And then you have to compile GCC with this cross compiling, with this cross platform, cross architecture configuration, and you install them, and you have to link those glmd headers to the install tools and whatever that is. I haven't done that yet. That's why my GCC that I've just currently compiled in my new partition doesn't work. So anyway, this is what it is. You download it from the source and you have to compile it yourself. This is just a guide on how to do that. It has nothing to do with being if you install Linux from scratch, it is not actually called Linux from scratch. It actually just a standalone Linux system that is not a distribution, that doesn't come with bundled software. You just compiled everything from yourself, and that's the basics of it. Now when you cross compile your GCC compiler and you chroot into your new environment, then you have to use that compiler to build the main native compiler, and then you can install all those tools that are necessary for you to be able to have a fully functional operating system. Now at the last, very last, you need to install the kernel. That is not actually very hard right now, because if you take a Gen 2 actually does that pretty well. So the difference between kernels across many distributions is that kernels are, sometimes kernel can be modified slightly, not very significantly but slightly, and the slap the name of the distribution name into it, and that's their kernel. So every distribution, almost every distribution, has their own custom kernel. Now Gen 2 also, although Gen 2 you can build with Gen 2 a custom kernel, still Gen 2 doesn't use the master GitHub, the, I don't know what to say, that the main Linux kernel that Linus Torvalds develops and contributes every single day. Now these are the configurations, and if you take a look at it and if you get daunted by it, don't use Gen kernel. Just Gen kernel is extremely slow and it doesn't optimize very well. Just use it, and sometimes it will build something very, you can just read the manual, okay, and it'll be good. So anyway, if you take a look at my thing, I really mess up with the keys here because I can't see anything on the keyboard right now. Now if you take a look at the configuration files of configuration for the kernel, which is, first of all, let's do classic. These are the two kernels I have. As you can see, there's the Gen 2 suffix after the generic Linux 5.11.2 generic kernel, that is the Gen 2. I'm using the number one, that is a symlink to this file. So let's see, if you type out file user source Linux, you'll see that it is a symlink to the same thing. Oh well, so there has to be a config file, which is the configuration file of what to compile, what not to compile, what kind of dependencies you have. Now if you take out the size of this, now note that every single line, there's no it doesn't accommodate two configuration variables into one line. So every line has unique configurations. There are comments as well, but you can enable them as well. So if you take a look at it, it is 9560 16. So this is a lot of configuration to be done. Now if you take a look at the actual If you take a look at the source tree, it also has a make file, and that make file uh, somewhat does the same thing with the configuration, just slightly different from Gen 2. Well, it's almost the same, but you cannot, you don't, I don't, so no one really would use the Gen 2 kernel or the Arch kernel for Linux from scratch. If you want to use something of a kernel yourself, you're going to use this one right here, the original kernel from Linus Torvalds project. Now, building this kernel, you'll have a lot of experience with building kernels. If you have a lot of experience with building kernels on Gen 2, which is still an approachable distribution for people that are not really into extreme hardcore operating system management things. So that's why it's gonna be slightly approachable. Now, the structure of Linux from scratch is that you have to, so if you take a look at again, if you take out my root directory of trees, these are the directories. Every directory file is different. Some directory files are connected direct, are kernel object. They are different type of. I don't really know the details. I probably knew, but I forgot. Like dev utilizes kernel object files and kernel itself to provide, and sys has some files that are not your traditional files. So if you take a look at the type of the file, let's say file descriptor is a symbolic link to self-fd. This is a, now what is this? Well, let's see std error fd2. So it's just a link, but you can use your separate types of file. I'm not gonna go into it. It's just a basic kernel module building thing with files, I guess. Now, how much does it take for you to sacrifice your life to be able to install this charm of an operating system, which is vanilla Linux? Now, this is the end and this is the beginning. This is the entire book structure. Now, the most important part is the cross compilation section. If you do it right and then you compile GCC like that, you have to compile this packages. You have to compile these tools like tar said, make. Of course, you have to install make, compile make, and I've done bash for now with my native compiler for now. Of course, it's very stupid. Then you have to install binutils native and GCC native. So this is the temporary, and you use the temporary tools, then you can actually churn into your new environment after you build those tools, and now you are set. After that, so for me, if you take a look at me, I've created this four directories for bin. We have this, as many packages we have. I've installed compile vim and other things as well. Now our cross compiling is xgcc. Oops. Excuse me for the password. This is our GCC 13. This is an experimental version I've installed, and there's a problem. I don't know if it's a bug or something I've done wrong. Maybe I haven't used, I don't have user include. There's nothing to install. So for vim, you have to first export. Now I cannot, so if you don't export this, you see that you need these packages, which are, I don't know where to find them. I have no idea actually. So what I did is that I copied the thing from my host system to this environment. Now if we export the path, live64 live64, and then you start vim, it does start. Now I have created this simple C program. Of course we don't need that. It does a lot of weird things. Let's say we return 1. This is just a simple program in C. This is not even a program, just to see how the compiler works. Now if you say xgcc, this is the cross compiler, the 13 version of cross compiler, and if you try to compile this, there is no std predef. So this is the problem I'm currently stuck with, except everything works for now. Now our next task will be to install glibc and the headers, which I haven't done yet. Of course this is not a actual installation video, this is just exploring. So at the end of the day, what you want is to learn from this experience. It is not your goal to have a fully functional operating system that you can use on a convenient basis. It is meant to make you learn about how the tool chain works, how it's compiled, how linked. So it's all about learning. It's not about, you will fail a lot of times, but it is what it is. You have to learn from your mistakes and just enjoy the movement of compiling and using this. So my chroot is complete. Now for now I will try to build the LFS system, LFS, so I can chroot there with my own libraries, which I haven't copied from my host system, and then we will install the basic system for then, when I have a lot of time to see my computer compile all of this shit, and then be able to chroot into our environment, install the kernel, and I don't know, I have to research a little bit more there. So this is basically Linux from scratch. You basically go out there and pick up your own tools and build it together. That's what it is. Nothing more, nothing less. Just a simple guide on how to install this. I love it, absolutely love it, because I love Linux. I love GNU/Linux. Pardon me for that. Alright, so I think I'll end the video here. I hope this video was as shitty as the previous one, so don't forget to leave a dislike. And if you actually like this video, well, I don't know what to say. It's just incredible that my shitty videos are getting through. Well, anyway, we'll see you in the next video.